Can an anxious and avoidant work out? The $1,000,000 question. So guys, my name is Sabrina Zohar. I'm a dating coach and host of Do the Work podcast, and I help people with anxiety and dating. That's my shtick. And I know a lot of people might think, oh, well, I'm avoidant or I don't have anxiety. And here's a spoiler alert. Yes, you do, because you're a human. So we can talk about it. So when we talk about the anxious trap and the avoidant and the dynamic that they have together, there's a harsh reality that people don't want to face. And that is that both of these people need each other in order to ensue in this trap, right? So let's even just go over quickly the attachment style. So we have somebody who's secure, who can give and receive love. They don't feel like it is a threat to who they are in order to be close to somebody. And they also don't feel like they need all this crazy space when they're not with somebody. So they have a high sense of self and a high sense of others. And so when we look at the anxious attacher, that is somebody who has a low sense of self, but a high sense of others, which is why the anxious attacher comes off very, cool, calm, collected at first of like, oh yeah, no, I'm just here to connect, right? But then over time, when they start to see that connection is wavering, they'll start to engage in things like protest behavior, which could be matching energy, trying to come out more severely because there is a threat to the connection. And when there is a threat to the connection, the anxious attacher feels that they're only safe if they have that person back. And so that's why it's a lot of external. You tell me I'm okay, right? And they don't do well with that space. Then we have the avoidant attacher. And so think about the opposite, right? So an avoidant attacher has a high sense of self and a low sense of others. So they see it as, I can only trust myself. These are people that maybe in a household, they were grown up to have their feelings dismissed, or when they express themselves, they would get punished, or they would get the cold shoulder from their parent. And so they learned emotions aren't safe. And so that they need that independence. I can only rely on myself. Then we have the disorganized, which gets tossed in, and that's a low sense of self and a low sense of others. And so that's that amalgamation of wanting closeness, then pulling away. And that's that real severe push-pull. And so when we talk about the anxious avoidant trap, I get this question all the time. Well, can it work out in a relationship? And it's like, sure. I mean, can you win the lottery? Absolutely. But we have to look at a few things. So when it comes to like even my partnership, my partner is a little bit more avoidant and I'm more anxious. We have both worked so hard to be more secure within our partnership, but that doesn't mean that we don't still have moments of anxiety or avoidance. And that is normal because you're a human. So I wouldn't expect that all of a sudden it's going to go away. But when it comes to understanding the trap, it's like we see it all the time. The anxious person will come in and build this closeness, and the avoidance looking at this as, oh my God, look how beautiful. Like they can feel close to me. They don't get scared. They don't get threatened. This feels so good. And so they'll go with it until they're triggered. And both people, there's this common misconception that the avoidant is like the worst person in the world, but the anxious person expresses themselves. And it's like, the reality is the anxious person isn't actually expressing themselves. Constantly talking doesn't necessarily mean you're communicating. Shout out to my favorite movie, Eternal Sunshine, that line from that. And so I think there's a common misconception that the anxious person, well, I'm saying something. It's like, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are articulating or communicating effectively. That can also be coming from a place of anxiety. And so you'll see that the avoidant can be really charming at first and really lovely and really engaging. And the anxious person is loving this. They feel that connection. They feel that vibe. Both of them are happy. And then something happens. A trigger happens to where maybe the avoidant feels, hey, this is feeling too much. Oh, I'm starting to lose my independence. And so naturally, when they start to feel that, they'll pull away. And so that's their trauma response is, I need to shut down. I have to preserve. I have to protect. This doesn't feel safe anymore. And the anxious folk is looking this going, but I don't understand. There's a threat to our connection. They're pulling away. And so then, of course, the anxious person starts to overcompensate. Okay, well, let me move closer. Since you're pulling away, I can come closer to you to try to bridge that gap. And then this whole kind of trap ensues. The anxious person is constantly trying to seek that validation from the avoidant. The avoidant is running away because they start to feel like they're shutting down. And then both people are emotionally unavailable. That's also a common misconception. Both partners are unavailable because if you're actually in touch with your wants, needs, and desires, and you're really in touch with how you're feeling, then you're going to know how to handle this a little bit more effectively. Because like, if somebody's going to pull away that I'm dating, I will have a conversation with them of like, hey, I noticed that there's a shift in our dynamic. Am I picking up on that correctly? And if that person can communicate and we can have a conversation, great, then we can get somewhere. But in my old anxious days, whenever I'd start to feel a guy pulling away, for me, I'm a heterosexual woman, so I'm talking in those norms. This could be for anybody. I'm just referring into a personal experience. Whenever I would feel a man pull away, that was my invitation. Prove it. Try harder. Go more. No, they just don't know you well enough, right? They don't have that time with you, so show them. Try to be there for them. And what I learned along the way was like, that was just giving into this dynamic even more. Because then when they pull away and the anxious person feels like, oh my God, you abandoned me, you left me. Then when the avoidant might regulate, they'll come back and be like, hey, okay, I feel better now. And everybody is on their best behavior until the next time and the next time and the next time. So can this dynamic work? Yeah, but you know what it takes? Two willing fucking participants, two people that are really invested in their healing in order to do so. So the anxious person, their job here is to learn how to self-soothe, to learn that space is okay. Not everything needs to be handled in that exact moment and in that second, that it's okay to take a beat and say, hey, okay, you need a minute, I need a minute. Let's just take a second. Let's regulate our nervous systems. We'll come back and we'll be in a fresher space. And the avoidant person needs to learn that it's okay to fucking communicate with your partner. It's okay to express yourself. Now, the biggest aspect here is like both parties involved doing the work on themselves to really understand where they learned that behavior from. So like I said, my partner is a little bit more avoidant and I'm really anxious. And so when we'll have conflict, I understand that he might need a minute. And so I'll say, okay, you know what? Let's just take a second. Let's go process. Let's think for a second and then we'll remove ourselves. And then I'll come back maybe 20, 30 minutes later and say, hey, I wanted to check in. How you feeling? And he'll be like, okay, cool. Now is time for me to step up and tell you how I'm feeling. And when he does, I don't berate him. I don't attack him. Instead, I just the first thing I'll say is, thank you for sharing. I know that that was difficult for you, and I really appreciate when you let me know how you're feeling. Because if somebody is avoidant, has always been put down for expressing their feelings, it's really important to create a safe space. And same with the avoidant folk. If your partner's super anxious, then sometimes it's okay to take that moment to be like, hey, I know that you're feeling this right now. What's actually coming up for you? And I'm just here to listen. I just want to listen so that I can support you so that you can get it off your chest. But both people really have to learn how to actually communicate with each other, because 99.9% of the time, a relationship doesn't end because there's a lack of love. There's a lot of people I have loved in my life, but that doesn't mean that my needs were being met. And that doesn't mean that they actually have the bandwidth in order to step up in the ways that I needed them to. That just meant that I liked parts about them. And part of compatibility is also, can you guys communicate? So just because you might date somebody that's a little bit more avoidant and you're more anxious doesn't mean that you can't grow through that and say, hey, I'm going to use these moments to challenge myself and really sit in this discomfort to see what comes up for me. And then the same with the avoidant partner to say, whoa, I'm going to challenge myself to do something uncomfortable, which is express myself and see what happens. Because I understand how scary it can feel. But you can't be in a relationship if somebody is super avoidant and they refuse to go to therapy, they refuse to get help, well, then what are we doing here? You can't do the work for both of you. You can't be the one that's coming in saying, well, I'm going to make sure that everything's great and I'm going to do the work for both of us and I have to do 90%, they just have to do 10. It's like, no, reciprocity in a relationship means both people are invested and both people are working towards a common goal. And that common goal is that both of your needs are met, that both of you feel seen, heard, and understood, that both of you feel safe in this relationship to express yourself, to have a moment to say, hey, here's how I'm feeling today, or hey, here's what's coming up for me today, or hey, here's what's going on. It's super important for both people to be able to have that safety. And so without that in a relationship, y'all don't have a relationship. And so I know for so many, it's like, well, what do I do? Because when I say something, they shut down. It's like, well, then that's the moment where you can start by saying, hey, I know normally you shut down, but if I'm not able to express myself, I don't actually know how we're going to be able to be in a relationship together. And then it's taking that information and seeing, can this person actually do that? It's okay if they can't. It's okay. Well, then you know what that just means? That maybe this doesn't work for you right now. That if your needs aren't met, that you don't have to continue to self-abandon what it is that you want, need, and desire just to make this relationship work. But an avoidant and an anxious person, absolutely. They can absolutely work out if both people are invested in making this relationship work. And both people are being honest with themselves. Both people are showing up authentically. Both people are trying to do the work. But if you're looking and telling me, I don't even have a partner that's willing to acknowledge that they've done something wrong, well, then you're constantly now just reliving child-parent dynamics where you have to prove yourself. You have to continue to show yourself, hoping that this person's going to choose you, hoping that this person's going to have this come to Jesus moment, wake up and say, you're the one for me. I want to be with you. And I wish it worked out that way. It just doesn't. Life is not the movies. Life is very much fucking real. And what's part of being real and being an adult and dating in this world is understanding that not everyone's going to be able to meet your needs. And if you can't even meet your own needs and you're expecting everybody else to meet yours, that's a grave disconnect. So If you're dealing with somebody that's a little bit more avoidant or anxious for that matter, it's important to understand each other a little bit more and to also know that like if that person that's avoidant shuts down, it's not because they don't care about you. It's because they don't know how to handle confrontation, and so they shut down because it's overwhelming. And same with the anxious person. The avoidant person needs to look at the anxious person. No, they're not fucking crazy, and no, they're not manic. They're experiencing a lot, and they're scared they're going to lose this connection with you. They are scared that they're going to be alone. They're scared that they're going to be abandonment. Do you notice how both of these stem from fear? That's the underbelly of it, is fear. So if we understand that a little bit better, no, it's not if he wanted to, he would, because that is just blatant bullshit. That's just assuming that everybody, it's just about want, and that trauma doesn't actually impact people differently when it does. And when you start to do the healing work, you start to realize life isn't so black and white. There's a lot of gray. And that nuance is so important to understand, because that compassion that we hold for other people is ultimately the compassion that we need to have for ourselves if we genuinely want to see our relationships grow. Because if you're going to go out as a fucking bull in a china shop to every person, then imagine how you're speaking to yourself. And then we wonder how we're not making progress in places. So yeah, an anxious and avoidant person can work out if both people are very involved and willing to put the work in to make this something. So I hope that was helpful, you guys. Please follow along. You can listen to Do the Work podcast. We have so many experts and guests that come on and talk about this stuff all the time. And we're just here to help you guys and give you some resources that are actually going to fucking help you have a healthy and secure relationship, not this clickbait bullshit that's just going to keep you single for a lot longer than you'd like to be.